I'm Kathy Savro, Creative Director of Shape Your Life, a company distinguished in the area of health and wellness. I'm proud to be a member of this distinguished team of professionals presenting this Soul Communication series of webinars you are enjoying. Tonight, I welcome you to the fourth in this 9-part webinar series sponsored by Gene House of Soul Communication and in association with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Soul Communication is a company dedicated to growing new insights for conscious lifestyles, and as I say every week, it's an honor to be a part of this illustrious group. Once again, tonight it's my privilege to serve as your host. I'd like to begin by introducing you to someone you've likely come to know and admire, Dr. Sharon Joy Ng, who presented her first in a series of 3 webinars on August 1st entitled Awakening to Your Soul Story. Tonight, she presents her second webinar entitled Finding Spaces for the Soul. Before she gets started, let me tell you a little bit more about Sharon. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in psychology and her PhD in the area of clinical psychology. As a professor of psychology for 22 years, she has taught at a number of institutions of higher learning, including Yuba Community College, Woodland Community College, California State University in Sacramento, American River College, Sierra College, and California State University in Fresno. The courses she taught included general psychology, gender, consciousness studies, codependence, human sexuality, abnormal psychology, personal and social adjustment, and personality theories. In addition to teaching, Sharon has authored 3 books: Metaphors of the Feminine and Masculine, Creating a Personal Mythology, and Breaking the Code of Codependence, Becoming Conscious Through the Transpersonal. Her most recent publication is a typical reader through the National Social Science Press entitled Body, Mind, and Psyche. Sharon has studied with David Feinstein, Stanley Krippner, Bruce Lipton, Stanislav Grof, and Grandmaster Mantak Chia. With a first-degree black belt in Taekwondo, I would say the bottom line is, don't mess with Sharon. At the end of Sharon's presentation this evening, we will open the chat room for a question and answer period. Please don't be shy. You'll find the chat box located at the bottom left-hand corner of your computer screen, and below that is the box where you can type in your questions, thoughts, and ideas so that Sharon can address them for you. So, let's not wait any further. Let's introduce Sharon to the room. Sharon, take it away.
Okay. Thanks so much for that introduction, Kathy. That was great. I love that. Welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you again, and I am really excited to talk about finding spaces for the soul to be present. I want to give you a brief overview of where we're going to be going. I'm going to do a little bit of definition first of our title, and then we're going to be talking about basically how can we make space for the soul to emerge and to be present. And then we're going to be looking at different ways in which we can make space for our soul by going through the lenses of psychology. I'm not going to go through all the lenses, but some of the major ways in which we can begin to look at our behavior and to look at our own psyche to be able to discover in what ways maybe that we have filled the spaces that we do have in our soul, we maybe have filled them up with other things that maybe perhaps don't quite work for us and things that we might want to change. So we're going to be looking at conditioning and reinforcement. We're going to be looking at the nature of consciousness development by looking at brain waves and looking at that nonverbal period again when we don't have command of language. And because we don't have command of language, we are still cataloging and remembering things that happen and the feelings that we have, but they aren't in a verbal form. So it's very difficult to access our memories through talking therapy in those situations. We're going to be looking at perceptions and sort of looking at Bruce Lipton's work in the sense of how our perceptions are usually cataloged either into a growth mode or a protection mode. And we're also going to be exploring the bubbles in the unconscious. Now, last time we were together, I did talk about the bubbles in the unconscious, but I didn't go into great detail on it. This time we will. And the way we're going to end this webinar is I'm going to actually walk you through a couple of Qigong practices. And these Qigong practices form part of what I will, what we would consider to be the transpersonal approach in psychology. And so the transpersonal approach in psychology encompasses those practices and those theories that look at human beings as an energy system. So let's get moving and look at the dove that we have here. This dove is representative to me of the soul. And I want you to think of the term psychology, because I am a psychologist. The term psychology always comes to mind when I start talking about human behavior. And I want you to realize that the term psychology, the first part of the word, psyche, actually is Greek for soul. So although we don't hear much about the soul when we start talking about psychology in the traditional sense, as we are forging new avenues in looking at behavior, we're starting to realize that we really can't address human behavior in a very holistic way and in a way that really helps people at a very deep level unless we begin to address this, concept of the soul, okay? And we also have to consider the spirit. So when we're looking at behavior, and as we are going to go through these different ways of looking at behavior, I want you to keep in mind that really at the very core of every individual is something that is much more than the parts that we're going to be talking about. So my question to you is basically, what currently fills up those spaces in our soul? Why do we have to make space for our soul to be present? Isn't our soul already present? Or is it that it's filled up with other things? And I'm going to propose that we're going to be looking at some of those memories we might have, some of those behaviors that we might have that do fill up those spaces in our psyche that maybe perhaps prevents our soul from being able to be present. So how are we going to make room for the soul? One of the things we have to do first, when you look at the title again, remember we were asking, about finding spaces for the soul to be present. So I wanted to look at this term, being present. I thought about this, and it came to me that basically when we're still, we have to be still in order for spaces to open up in our psyche. If you look at the picture that I posted there, it says, quiet the monkey mind. And there's a monkey right on top of your mind, right? And I know that a lot of you can relate to this whole idea that it seems that we've got this roof brain chatter always going. We're always constantly chattering, thinking. And when we are like that, we are actually filling up any space that we might be able to have the soul emerge into. So one of the things that's really helpful that as we start to uncover what those spaces are filled with, that we can create more space by being still. Another thing that's really important to create those spaces is to stay in the here and now. Now, I know that's probably pretty difficult for most of us because most of the time we're, focused on the past. We're looking at, what has happened, what we did, maybe what we should have done, or we're looking to the future. And we're fretting about what's going to happen or what might not happen. So one of the things that brings us back to our center is to have that here and now focus and to be present in our bodies, in the moment, and at the same time developing that space in our consciousness that's going to allow for that inner wisdom that we have to come up. Developing mindfulness, that's another way in which we can be present. So to be mindful is really to be in the here and now, because what we're doing is we're actually we're paying attention to all the stimuli around us. We're aware of it. We are aware of the sensations in our own body. We're aware of any tension we might be holding. We're aware of our awareness. And the important thing about this mindfulness is that we have to do two things. Number one, we have to remind ourselves to be mindful. So therefore, I've written that intent towards mindful awareness. That means that I have to have that intention that, you know what, if I'm going to be mindful, if I wanted to develop mindfulness, I'm going to have to remind myself all the time to be mindful, because I think it's really human nature. And it probably is a characteristic of consciousness that we tend to just float off and keep going, and we talk to ourselves, we make up stories, we're assigning stories to things that are happening to us instead of experiencing what is really happening. So the other bullet there underneath where it says non-judgment is the other thing, that with mindfulness, mindfulness is a non-judgmental attitude towards whatever is happening. In other words, even though I might be feeling what I'll call pain, I'm not going to suffer, because if I start ascribing, oh, this pain is bad, or this pain is, debilitating, then what I'm doing is I am creating my room for suffering. So it's not necessarily pain that makes us suffer. It is really how we look at that pain, and we label it. So we label that generally pain is not good, rather than pain might be something that is trying to inform me. So having that non-judgmental attitude towards whatever it is that's going on in your present experience is a really good way to develop mindfulness. So the term attunement, too, that's another way that we can be present, because, attunement is a term that Dan Siegel has been using. Dan Siegel is a professor at UCLA, and he is the man to go to when you want to talk about interpersonal neurobiology. So he is developing ways for us to understand that attunement is essential if we are to develop the parts of our brain that are going to allow us to feel good and to be able to be more present with other people. Now, you're probably wondering, what is attunement? Okay, so what attunement is something that we all need. We need it as children, and that is that if we get it as children, then we, as adults, those parts of the brain, in the left prefrontal cortex especially, those parts of the brain become more well developed, which allows us to have the capacity to feel better as adults. Attunement is the ability of, let's say, my parents recognizing my feelings and noticing my body languages and noticing maybe my facial expression, noticing different things about my presence, and that acknowledgement alone makes me feel that I am being I'm being acknowledged, I'm being seen. That's called attunement. We need attunement, and if we're going to help other people, we need to attune to them too. So one of the things that, like I said, that will help us to be more present is to be able to focus on attuning ourselves to other people and to attune to ourselves too, to be more aware. So one of the ways that I thought about looking at how we're going to uncover where those spaces are in our soul, and how we can create more space so that our soul can communicate with us in a sense and give us the wisdom to be able to be more in touch with what our true needs are rather than what we think our needs are. So we're going to uncover the contents of the psyche, like I said, by using some of the lenses in psychology. It's a reductionist approach, but I want you to remember that this reductionist approach, where we're going to be reducing your psyche down to these different slices, it will give us the insight, because one of the ways that, or probably one of the essential things that we need in order to facilitate change, is we have to be aware. We have to be aware of our behaviors. We have to be aware of what is in those spaces, and not necessarily how they got there, but that they are there. And if we know that that through this insight of looking at these reduced sort of slices of our behavior, it will allow us to be able to put us back together. Because that saying that I have there, we are more than the sum of our parts. Like I said, when we are pulling us apart, and that's basically what psychology does, because we try to be able to explain behavior and understand behavior from these many different points of view that psychology concerns itself with. But the essential thing to remember is that even when we get all this information, we need to put the person back together as a whole. And even when we do that, we know what those component parts are, I would still say that every human being is more than the sum of their parts, because there's that soul, there's that essence in there that I don't know that these psychological approaches necessarily capture. But hopefully by looking at these pieces, putting them back together, we get better insight into who we are, and therefore, by doing that, hopefully, we can also pop those bubbles of the unconscious. So let's talk a little bit about behaviorism, actually, because we're looking at conditioning and reinforcement here. So a lot of the spaces in our soul that are filled up right now are just simply filled up with habits. And these habits that we have learned are habits that are either conditioned through us classically, like Pavlov's dogs, or they are habits that we have learned work for us. Maybe they worked for us when we were children. So we continue to do these same things because we expect certain outcomes to result from those behaviors or those ways in which we operate in the world. So I want you to be thinking about that. First of all, let's look at your automatic behaviors, okay? When we talk about classical conditioning, we're talking about those things that set us off, those reactionary kinds of situations where somebody says something, or you see something, or you're in a situation and it's familiar to another situation you had been in, and it caused you a lot of anguish, made you really nervous. Maybe it made you even sick to your stomach, okay? So when you are in that kind of situation, and there's all the associations that you make to the environment that you're in when that particular situation happens, okay? So those, when you find yourself in a situation like that again, or maybe somebody says the same words to you again, or has the same tone of voice, or maybe they look like somebody that has maybe offended you, or maybe, you know, hurt you in some way, then that is enough to trigger that automatic reaction in yourself to get your heart beating again, you know? And what I mean by heart beating again, I'm talking about that rapid heartbeat when we are anxious, when we are upset, when that's a real indicator that the sympathetic nervous system is kicking in, okay? So think about those things, those reactions that you have, those buttons that you have, and think about, wow, what are those situations where I'm set off so easily, and yet I don't want to do that. I want to be different. I want to change. I don't want to be so reactionary. I want to be able to respond to the situation. Okay, so hold that in your thoughts, and we'll talk more about maybe some of the ways in which we can address those kinds of automatic behaviors. Your volitional behaviors are actually those behaviors that you initiate consciously. So therefore, when you choose to walk to the left, walk to the right, to sit down, those sorts of things, that's volitional behavior. If I decide that I'm going to say something to somebody because I'm hoping that it's going to maybe get them to see me in a good light, the reason why I'm going to use those particular words is probably because when I used them before, it brought forth the kind of result that I wanted. So I said something to somebody, they responded to me positively, so therefore I cataloged in my brain, aha, that works. That is a behavior I'm going to do again. But think about this. When you're a kid and you're growing up, and maybe you didn't grow up in a family that was really nurturing, okay? And maybe it was a situation where you couldn't quite control things. But what you did learn is that you learned that if you said certain things, or you didn't say certain things, or you acted a certain way, if you did certain things, then that would control the environment. So in a sense, let's just say that somebody, like maybe it's your father. Your mother says, wait till your dad gets home, okay? You know, and so you get a little nervous because maybe your dad is a little grouchy when he gets home, okay? So what happens is, what do? We begin to stop down our behavior. We begin to do those things that will prevent the father from being set off. So those are the kinds of behaviors that we get programmed into us. The reinforcement would be there is that, you know what, your dad's in a better mood tonight because you didn't leave your toys out in the living room or something like that, okay? So you learn to do certain things, and some of them are very functional. But for those of you who were in a dysfunctional environment, you have to be thinking about how the behaviors that you learn are already programmed into you. They become automatic responses, because they're habitual now, and they're habits. So how are you going to be able to recognize when that is no longer working for you? Okay? I think we have to step back, and we have to be able to look at our behavior and to become aware, and that's the first step towards changing. So, like I said, the dysfunctional behavior may have worked in the past. We continue to use it because it's familiar. But here's the good thing with anything that we have learned, okay? And when I talk about learning, like I said, I'm talking about the classical conditioning or the operant conditioning that we've, basically learned the different kinds of behaviors that we do, as well as what our body does, what it reacts to. Those behaviors can be unlearned, okay? So that's the good news. One of the things I think that's really important to this process of opening up that space because of the habits that we have formed in the course of our life is that we have to step back and we have to become the observer. So making space, how are we going to make space? Like I said, becoming the observer. What does that mean? You know, if any of you have seen the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, you'll be familiar with the man Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who basically gave us this advice that when we are set off, you know, when your button gets pushed and you're flaring up, your heart's starting to beat really fast, you're starting to sweat, the anger is flaring up, what you can do is you can take one step back. Take a step back, have your behavior in front of you instead of consuming you. Look at that behavior and begin to observe. Look at that behavior and say, wow, I sure am mad right now. What is making me so mad? So, you know, as I become the observer, I become more objective in a sense, because now I can say, wow, I'm so mad, but am I mad simply because of this situation that just happened? Or am I bringing a lot of my past into the current situation? Because maybe it resembles, what just happened resembles something that you were very, very sensitive to. And so what happens is in a sense, you're hypervigilant to those kinds of infractions again. So here it goes. Somebody does that. What do? You react. But what you have to do is you have to step back, look at that, and then analyze it. Wow, this reminds me of when I used to be criticized by my dad so much. No wonder that when this person just said that, that set off that sensitivity button that I have about being criticized. So when I recognize that, because I step back and become the observer, I have the opportunity to stop. I have the opportunity to calm myself down. Now remember, your brain takes a while to calm down, so you may have to say, I'm sorry, but you just really set a button off on me, so what I need is a little bit of space, and I'll get back to you in half an hour, okay? And then that way we prevent ourselves from saying things that we really don't mean, things that we don't want to say, but we have to give ourselves that space. So loosening the neural nets, you know, that is the whole idea that when you are having these reactions, what is happening is that it's just the reconnection of all those neural nets in your brain that accompany that particular state of mind. Now, those neural nets also cause neurotransmitters and other chemicals to be flooded in your brain. And so it becomes like what Candace Pert would call a chemical cocktail. Now think about cocktails. I mean, most of us can become addicted to cocktails, right? So this emotional cocktail is not any different from that alcoholic cocktail where we tend to use that term about being addicted. But I want you to think about how we actually become addicted to our own emotions. We become addicted to them in the sense that our body craves that emotional cocktail along with those neural pathways being activated again. So if I can step back and stop the reaction from happening again, I'm actually loosening those neural nets again, okay? So a lot of our memories that we form during our lifetime are actually formed at a time when we don't have command of language. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I want you to think about is that there are things that are implicit in our memories. In other words, we know how to do things. Our body responds to things without us even thinking about it, okay? Things like implicit memories, would be memories that maybe you had formed when you were nonverbal. Okay, so all the memory holds is maybe the vision of what you saw, what you heard, the emotions you were feeling. So those implicit memories need to be made explicit. In other words, you need to become aware of those particular reactions that you're having so that it can be integrated into consciousness. Because an integrated conscious person is much happier and is much easier to be around too at the same time. This particular slide I wanted to share with you the developmental process of what's going on in our brain as we are growing up, because I think this is pretty important when we start looking at how we have been programmed during our life. I know a lot of us don't like to think that we've been programmed, but according to Bruce Lipton's work here, and this is taken from his work, that when you look at the brain activity and you look at the kinds of brain waves that our brain emits during these age periods, you see that from 0 to 2, infants are primarily in delta consciousness, okay? It says unconscious there because, as adults, when we are in delta wave activity, our brain is in delta wave activity, we are unconscious. We are basically sleeping. We are in deep sleep. But as little infants, those children have these predominance of delta waves, but they're still awake. What this means is that they cannot intervene, they cannot censor, they cannot evaluate, they just download, okay? So you see there from age 0 to 6, we are in these states of consciousness that are slow and are actually reflective of the hypnotic state. So think about this. From 0 to 6, we're being programmed. Now, this probably has an evolutionary kind of advantage to it because had we been able to intervene in the experiences that we were having as little children or in the things that were being said to us, if we were able to actually scrutinize them and analyze them, we would not learn what we do learn. And as far as survival, we need to learn what our parents teach us to survive, because hopefully mostly they're helping us to learn positive things, but things that are going to help us to survive. But you know, as I know, that not everyone is lucky to be able to have a nurturing and caring environment. And so even those things that are said to you when you're a little child, you download that as truth. You download that as truth. You believe it. You believe it to be true. You know, Piaget talked about these cognitive stages of development, and from 0 to 6, you're basically, even from 2 to 6, as we start looking at the pre-operational stage, you realize, children are in that imaginary play, but the other thing is that they are egocentric. And so if we are egocentric, that means basically that we think the world revolves around us. But that's not to be self-centered. That is to be egocentric in the sense that we believe that we cause what happens in the world, okay? So as we're aging, okay, from 6 to 12, we begin to emit alpha consciousness, which is that calm consciousness, which actually is very creative. It's a very creative state of consciousness. And as adults, we're always in beta consciousness. We're in that active monkey mind, riff brain chatter state of consciousness. And we have to stop ourselves down and slow our minds down by getting into a meditative state in order to reach alpha again. But when we do that, that's when our creativity can arise. So I wanted you to just look at this slide here because I wanted you to think about how much you actually were programmed to believe that what you learned, what you saw, what you had modeled before you, good or bad, you took that in and you learned it. You learned it to where now when you find yourself in similar situations, you don't even have to think about it. You just do it. And so you know, it's like I've said to lots of my students before, is that how many of you have told yourself, I'm not going to be like my mom, or I'm not going to be like my dad, and yet when you find yourself in a relationship, you end up acting just like your mom or just like your dad. And I'm talking about those times when you're stressed. As long as you're conscious, you're going to be able to intervene and stop. But when you're stressed out, when you're taken over by your emotions, then what comes out of your mouth may not necessarily be your own, okay? So here we go, the nonverbal realm again. Like this little girl here, we download everything that we see and hear and experience, and we can't censor it. Okay, so I want you to think about that. That what happens is that as those things are learned, they're cataloged in our memory, in our psyche, and they fill up those spaces of our soul, so that in a sense, we can't access that information actually unless we find ourselves in similar situations where those maybe body postures are emulated again. You know, so when you were an infant, most of the time you were laying down. If I want to access some memories of yours that came from your infancy, the best way for me to do that is to lay you down like an infant, believe it or not. Okay, and then begin to see what happens through some kinds of provocation. And if I were to provoke you, I might be able to get some emotions out of you that might help you to access some of these infantile memories that were nonverbal. So, you know, back to the point of having these perceptions, I think that, you know, no matter what happens to us, it's really our perception that really matters. And like I said before, from age 0 to 6, we really don't have a lot of choice as to what we are presented with. And so our perceptions are just downloaded without our ability to be able to say, well, that's really good, or that's not very good. Okay? What happens is we just download it. Bruce Lipton, brilliant man here, he basically has asked us to think about how consciousness is our most powerful and the best friend that we can have in this whole scheme of things. Because when we start, you know, we start looking at what psychology has sort of argued with itself about, it's always been that nature-nurture debate, right? What is more predominant in my behavior? Is it the genetics that I was born with, you know, maybe my predisposition to shyness or my predisposition to risk-taking? Is it in my genetics? That's one thing. We learn from our genetics. So instinctually, for example, we don't have to put our hand in the fire and then tell ourselves, oh my gosh, you know, I think that's hot. I think I better remove my hand. We don't do that. We basically instinctively we remove it because there are certain perceptions about the world that we have learned that we know help us to survive as a species. So when you see a snake, jump back, okay, and then look at it to see if it's poisonous or not. Spiders, same thing. Some of them are poisonous, some of them aren't. But we don't know that. But if we don't react to that, then we've really sort of not done ourselves a favor. The other part of where our perceptions come from, we've just talked about, and that is basically your learned behaviors. Bruce Lipton refers to this as your subconscious mind. So your subconscious mind can run the program, can run your daily life. You don't even have to think about what you're doing. You do not have to be conscious to be human. It's the way I've always put it. Because to be conscious means that I'm going to be aware of my awareness, for one thing, but I'm also going to be aware of where these things are coming from, okay? So conscious mind is creative. It is the most powerful part of our consciousness. So when we start thinking about where do my perceptions come from, they come from my genetics, they come from nature, they come from our subconscious or nurture, and they also come from our creative conscious mind. So this slide here, I wanted you to see a little bit about the brain, okay? Because one of the things that Bruce Lipton also talked about is he says one of the things that we do when we perceive something in the environment, okay? We perceive something. That's one act, okay? But then in the next act, what we do is we have to determine, is it growth enhancing or is it something I need to protect myself from? So we encounter things as we're growing up as little children, and we rely on our parents to help us to determine what is growth enhancing and what is maybe something we should be fearful of, okay? But the problem is that our parents were also programmed by their parents, who were programmed by their parents. And so some of the things that they may have been programmed with to fear, for example, might not necessarily be something they need to be fearful about, okay? And yet they're passing this on to you because you see them as a little child. You see that you might see your mom, for example, react really strongly to a bird. And when she reacts strongly to a bird in a negative way, you're going to catalog that as a little child. You're going to catalog that as, ooh, birds are bad. Birds are dangerous, okay? So although this is a real good survival mechanism that we assign a value of either growth or protection to things, you have to also be able to go back now as an adult with awareness to scrutinize. Are those things that I thought were growth enhancing, are they really? And are those things that I perceive as being dangerous, are they really dangerous? If you look at the brain here, and you can see the amygdala down here, right here, this little blue area here, the dark blue, your amygdala is that part of your brain that's cataloging what is dangerous and what is not for you. Okay, it activates when you have encountered something that earlier in your life you cataloged as being dangerous. Your amygdala is going to act up and send the message to the rest of your nervous system that it needs to prepare to flee or fight or to freeze. Okay, so that part, the other part I wanted you to see here is the cerebellum. This is called the little brain too. We consider this larger cerebrum area to be our big brain. Okay, this is the neocortex. This is the area of the brain that is the most recent iteration in evolution. But this cerebellum is more ancient, okay? And what you don't see here is the brainstem. The brainstem is the most ancient part of our brain. The cerebellum is that part of our brain that we call the little brain, because once you've learned something, you don't have to think about it anymore. Now you'll see right here where I'm sort of focusing on this prefrontal cortex here. This is the part of the brain that you have to use when you're learning something. But once you've learned it, all that goes back here to the hindbrain, to the cerebellum, and now you don't even have to think about driving anymore. You don't have to think about walking. You don't have to think about playing the piano. If you've practiced and you've learned those things, it's in your cerebellum, and your fingers don't have to learn the positions, okay? So that's just sort of a brain overview of what's going on when we're assigning values to our perceptions. And so again, like I said, when we activate our central nervous system, what happens is we begin to shut down the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the business as usual system. When we activate the sympathetic nervous system, blood flow becomes inhibited to the prefrontal cortex. And remember, the prefrontal cortex is that part of your brain where you're doing all the thinking. If I'm not getting blood there and it's shutting down, I'm not going to be able to think. I'm not going to be able to be creative, okay? And at the same time, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated and, your pupils begin to dilate, it decreases salivation. That's why your mouth gets dry. Your heartbeat starts to accelerate. All these different processes begin to become activated when the sympathetic nervous system gets activated because your amygdala said, "Ooh, that's dangerous," right? But think about this. It not only inhibits blood flow to some of the important areas that we need for our thinking, but it also shuts down our growth. It, sh it shuts down our immune system, and it shuts down our intelligence. So how does it shut down our intelligence? I think I just told you how it does that, because when the prefrontal cortex is not available to us, we can't think. So we're less intelligent when we're really going from you know from habit, and when we're going from the sympathetic nervous system. Our immune system gets shut down because what happens is that there are corticosteroids that are uh, secreted that shut down the immune system, because you don't need to, like, for example, if you had an infection at the same time that a lion was chasing you, you would not need to fight that infection. What you need is that sympathetic action to get you away from danger. Okay? And of course, if it's not growth, then it must be protection mode. And if we're in protection mode, then we are not growing. Okay? So I guess to conclude this one part of this webinar, not the whole webinar, but at least this portion where we're looking at reinforcement, and we're looking at conditioning and those nonverbal areas of our behavior, that I want you to consider that in order for us to access those areas of our soul, I'll say, that we may need to use different kinds of techniques to access those areas other than what we would consider to be probably the foundation of psychology, at least in therapy, and that would be the talking cure that Freud popularized. Remember, if you formed memories in a nonverbal state, how are you going to access those memories verbally? If you had nothing, if you had no ability, I should say, to be able to articulate what was going on. Okay, so the access that you're going to have is going to have to come from another technique. And so the practices that I've listed here on the right-hand column, such as meditation, meditation will still the mind. It will open up the spaces to be able to allow the soul to come up and emerge, and it will also at the same time loosen some of those bubbles in the unconscious that I'm going to be talking about, so that you can begin to work through those and get back your libido. Because when we talk about the bubbles in the unconscious, you're going to see that your psychic energy, your libido, is being consumed by the bubbles that you have in your unconscious. Okay, so Qigong, I'm going to introduce you to some of those practices that it's going to help you to clear some of those spaces in your soul, because we're going to be working with emotions. The Qigong that I've learned is the emotional Qigong and medical Qigong. So I'll talk a little bit about those two approaches as we get to those points where we're going to be looking at those two practices. Yoga is another way to really become still, to work out the tensions of your body, to become more flexible, and to actually help your consciousness to become more flexible. It's amazing, I actually have students doing yoga in an online class, and the diligent students actually do the practice. And what they tell me is that not only are they able to do the posture, but what they're finding is that they are becoming less anxious, and that they are able to fall asleep easier. So those are two really good benefits of doing yoga postures. The other thing that can bring up some of these memories are energy techniques. So I've just put examples here of EFT, which is Emotional Freedom Technique, or EMDR, which is Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. Those are just two of the energy techniques that tap into your qi. And when we talk about your qi, and we talk about how we are energy systems, as we are in a sense embodied energy systems. We need a way to work with that energy so that that energy begins to flow, because when we talk about psychological health, it's directly tied to physical health and vice versa. So if our energy is stuck, we're physically not going to feel good. So if we can unstick that energy, we get more energy to all parts of our body. Our organs become healthier so that actually our emotions become in control. And the last thing I have here is the holotropic breath work, which was developed by Stanislav Grof and Christina Grof. And this is an amazing way to access the unconscious. And you will not only access those things that are nonverbal, from your experience, but you will also access things in the unconscious that come from the archetypal realm. The archetypal realm that Carl Jung talks about, where we're looking at the collective human race and many of the experiences that human beings have had, we can relate to through this holotropic technique. The other thing the holotropic breath work helps us to get in touch with also is uh, uh, physical things that have been stuck in our body, and I think I've said this before, but if you have asthma or if you have pain in your hands or pain somewhere, after you've gone through a holotropic breathwork session, and I can vouch for this personally because my husband and I have both gone through this holotropic breathwork session with Dr. Grof and 100 other participants, but it was very powerful, and I saw some real significant transformation occur in the participants that were there. So those are different techniques that we can utilize in order to access some of those memories that aren't easily accessed through other techniques that therapists use. Okay, so let's move in now to the bubbles of the unconscious. And I said earlier something about popping the bubbles. And what I meant by that is that, from the psychodynamic point of view, we have to look at our psychic energy as libido. Okay, I know Freud tended to use the term libido as meaning more of a sexual energy, but Jung used the term libido, and he said it was a more general life force energy, and that's the way that I use the term. So when you look at these bubbles, I want you to think of all these bubbles as those things that we hide from ourselves and from others. Imagine that this is a pot of water, and that these bubbles are in that water. And they have a tendency to want to come up, don't they? Because that's what bubbles do. But you, as being the ego, being the guard at the gate, you don't want those things to come up. You don't want to remember your failures. You don't want to think about your insecurities. You don't want to remember any abuse that happened. Any sexual fantasies you have that you've labeled as being bad, as being wrong, you push those down because they are unacceptable to you. Trauma that you've experienced, any fears that you have. So those are the things. I mean, we could go on probably all day labeling these bubbles as to all the things that we try to hide from ourselves and we try to hide from other people. Okay? So you'll notice that some of these bubbles have like halos around them. The reason why I put halos around them, like this one, insecurity. So if this insecurity bubble, you see how it's larger than a lot of these other bubbles. I made it larger because I wanted to talk about this idea of a complex, because Jung talked about this idea that if a bubble, and I'm just using my own term, if a bubble gets enough energy, it can develop into a complex, okay? So if I am insecure enough in different situations and people say things to me and ridicule me that make me feel more insecure, this bubble begins to grow, right? And as it grows, it gets fed in a sense because I've given attention to it, because this particular thing that someone said to me made me insecure, so I just gave it a little bit of libido. That bubble becomes bigger. Then I get in a situation and I didn't do something as well as I wished I was. That made me insecure, so that feeds into this bubble again, and it gets larger. When it becomes a complex, I love this because Jung said that these complexes are like magnets. They're magnets in the psyche. They are magnets in the, I will say that they fill up the space of the soul, because what they do is they're filling up our ability to be able to make room for anything positive, because we're dealing with all this negative stuff. So we're trying to hold it down. This complex is like a magnet, And whenever we, whenever we are not focused on something with awareness, we have what Jung called free libido. So when I say yes to somebody, I also mean no. Okay, so let's say my girlfriend calls me. She says, hey, can you help me on Saturday and Sunday to help me move? I've got to move and I've got to get out of there, and I really need your help. I can't find anyone else. And she's my really good friend. So part of me feels, gosh, I really want to help her, but the other part of me feels like, oh man, I really don't want to do that this weekend. I was hoping to be able to just chill out and take time for myself. So you see, I've got a yes and a no there, don't I? And if I have a yes and a no, and I only hold the yes in consciousness, in other words, I shove down into the unconscious and tell myself, Sharon, you're such a bad friend to even think of not helping her. Okay? So I've shoved that libido down. I've made it free libido. Now it can attach to this big insecurity bubble because this insecurity bubble is hungry. Okay? It wants more libido. So that libido could go into my insecurity bubble and therefore make me feel even more insecure by wondering what kind of a friend am I, right? Okay? So suppressing suppressing your memories is when you actually are doing it yourself. When you say, you know what, I don't want to think about that, or I'm going to forget about that. The thing is that when you suppress something, it just goes into the unconscious like these bubbles. And the same with repressed memories. I mean, we can't start the process of repression. It happens to us. We forget things because that's the way the psyche is. But the problem is that those things do not go away. So what I have there, what we ignore does not go away, is very, very true. It does not go away. It stays there. And so what we need to do is we need to find ways to lift these bubbles. We have to shake up this container here, and so those bubbles start to rise to the surface. And if we are still enough, and if we've made the space in our consciousness to be able to look at those bubbles as they come up, we'll be able to see them more objectively. We'll be able to depersonalize. We'll be able to maybe re-own some of the bubbles that we've discarded. Because maybe down here in the unconscious, you've discarded your creativity. Because maybe when you were a child and you were being creative and you maybe produced a beautiful work of art to you, okay? And then you were put down for it. All of a sudden, you push down into your unconscious, oh, creativity is not good. I better not do that anymore. That's not very good. Okay? So, again, I want you to think about each of these bubbles needs to be examined. And I would say, please be gentle with yourself when these bubbles start to pop up. Deal with the little ones first. The big ones, when you've made more space and when you have maybe somebody helping you, then that way you can maybe work through these issues that come up from these bubbles that will in turn, that once you've made room, your soul has a chance to be more present. And again, this next vat of bubbles probably looks very similar to the one that I just showed you, but I want you to look at the container itself. And if you look at the container itself, you'll see right here, I've attached bubbles to the container itself. So this represents Jung's whole idea that we are born into our human form not only with the physical characteristics of all human beings that have evolved over time, but that we also inherit what he called a psychoid inheritance. That psychoid inheritance is your inheritance of all the different ways in which human beings have reacted to different situations that they've encountered throughout their lives. Okay? So in a sense, it's a readiness. We're born ready to be a human. Okay? We're born ready to face whatever we're going to have to face. Like the very first time we take our very first step, we're ready for that. Okay? We're ready in our consciousness because it's already been programmed in that we will have that first step. But what I put here are things that are in red. The things that are in red are those things that I would say are archetypal. And for example, your first kiss. There was a time when you never had that first kiss, right? Being a husband, if you're a husband now, you weren't always a husband What were you before? You were a boyfriend, okay? We could also put a bubble here on the container for what a boyfriend should be like. And I'm saying the term should on purpose because when we say should, that means that we think that we ought to be that way, that people are expecting us to be that way. Okay, so all of these different labels that I put here, mother, the archetypal mother, that is the stereotypical mother. It is the mother of our ideals. But that archetypal mother could also have a negative side too. So we also know that in the archetypal mother, there's this expectation that we have of all mothers. Mothers should be caring, they should be nurturing, they should be encouraging, they should be supportive. And so we come into this world expecting and wanting and needing that kind of mothering. But I will suggest to you that in our own personal experience, we may not get that kind of mothering. So what happens is that this, right here, this red bubble here at the bottom of the mother, that as we experience our actual mother, it becomes more part of this, what we call the personal unconscious, okay? And so I can see this bubble start to stretch. And it forms up here, but it does not detach from this archetypal mother. But now you fill up the mother with your own experience of your own mother, good or bad, okay? So these archetypal situations, I want you to think about in what ways have you learned that these different roles that you had that you have assumed, these situations like the first kiss that you could anticipate, that are these things that you have thought about or not? And I will suggest to you, if you've not thought about what it's going to be like if you haven't gotten married yet, and you are going to get married, and you have not thought about what you believe your role is as a wife or a husband, and you haven't talked about this with your fiancé, then I would say you need to have that discussion because you both want to be on the same page, right? And when you both talk about what your ideals are and what you hope will happen and how, those roles that you're going to assume actually may deviate from the archetypal pattern of the husband or the wife, then that's wonderful because you're forming a personal definition of what you desire. But let me warn you, too, that when you are under stress, when you're tired, when you're consumed, this archetypal pattern will rear its ugly head, and that archetypal belief that a husband does this or a wife does that will rear its ugly head, and then we have to, sort of stand back, hopefully, after we've dumped on somebody, and we have to apologize because we'll realize then that, you know what, that was not me. I'm so sorry. It was, I don't know what happened. But as Jung said, Jung told us, he said that basically if we, these archetypes can actually take over our personality. So it's not like we have a complex, okay? I'll just use the term complex. It's not that we have a complex, but the complex has us, okay? So that wraps up pretty much where I'm going to be going with finding spaces for the soul to emerge and to be present. And now what I'm hoping to do is to take a little bit of time to actually walk you through a couple practices. This may take us about 20 to 25 minutes, and that will, take us to about the time when we can start to have a discussion. But let me just tell you a little bit about Qigong first, okay, and this philosophy that comes from the East. In Qigong, there are three major focuses of the kinds of practices that you can do to develop three different parts of your humanness. So there's Qigong that addresses medical issues. So you have health, right? And you have what we call the practices that are going to help us to be healthier. We have emotional Qigong, so that all of these practices actually address all these different areas. So we're addressing the physical, we are addressing health, we are also addressing the emotional. So there's emotional Qigong, and then the last one is spiritual Qigong. So we are developing all three aspects of ourself when we are doing these practices. Now, there are a lot of different practices. Like I said, I'm only going to share a couple with you, but they're very powerful practices that you can do every day. And you don't need any special equipment for this. All you need is some space. Keyword here. So, what I'm going to be walking you through is called the inner smile, and the other one is called the 6 healing sounds. And the philosophy behind these two practices is that when we have negative emotions, when we are angry, when we are sad, when we are depressed, when we are impatient, when we're frustrated, when we're worrying, when we're fearful, when we're anxious, when we are pitying people actually, or feeling sorry for ourselves, these negative emotions hurt us. They not only hurt in the psychological sense, but from Qigong language, we're hurting our organs. And the reason why it hurts our organs is because each of the negative emotions actually affects one of the major organs. And we'll be going through those organs and which organs those particular emotions affect. But think about this, that those negative emotions heat up that particular organ that it's associated with. So the practice that I'm going to show you is, or walk you through, is basically how to cool that organ down. You're going to cool the organ down, and at the same time, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be transforming the negative emotion into its positive counterpart. Like Master Shia said, he said, you know what? Emotions are here to stay. It's part of the human condition, so don't think you can get rid of your negative emotions. You won't be able to, okay? It's a part of who we are. But what we can do is we can do like we do in the garden. You know, we can take the things that are not very functional, the dead leaves, anything, and we can compost it. We can put it into the ground. And so metaphorically, that's what we're doing when we're doing the 6 healing sounds, for example. When we make the sounds, we imagine that sound leaving us and going down into the ground and mixing with the positive emotion to come back and spring forth from the earth as a positive emotion. Okay? So let me take you right here to this next slide where we do look at the inner smile. And then after we look at this and I talk about it, I'm going to walk you through it, okay? So I want you to notice here, I just love this. This is actually a picture of Master Chia, and this comes from his book. And I just love these illustrations that he gave about this inner smile. He pasted, I guess he pasted on these little smiley faces onto our organs so that, number one, you could visualize your organs. And you could visualize them smiling back at you, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to not only smile down to your organs, but you also are going to see your organs smiling back at you, okay? And we're going to go in a particular order. So we're actually going to start up here in the crown chakra. We're going to come down the face. We're going to go down the throat. We're going to go right to the heart. And when we get to the heart, we're going to basically smile at it and see it smiling back at us. Then we're going to move to the lungs. And then from the lungs, we're going to be moving down to our kidneys, which are these blue areas right here. So we go heart, lungs, and then, we go to the liver. Then we'll go to the kidneys. And then we go to the pancreas. Then we will come down to our sexual organs, and we'll end this inner smile there, okay? So basically your posture, let me talk a little bit about your posture first. If you're sitting in a chair, you should be sitting towards the edge of the chair so that your genital area is not being compressed by the chair, that you're sort of sitting on your bones, your sitting bones. And you should have your legs comfortably apart, feet flat on the ground, and your hands cupped in. You put one hand cupped into the other. So both palms are facing upwards, and one hand is comfortably cupped into the other one. Okay, so if you're ready, we're going to start the inner smile. Okay, so I want you first to get into the center of your head. And one way you can picture where the center of your head is to put your fingers on the sides of your temples, find that middle point inside your head, And then put your fingers to the back of your head and at your third eye, right above the middle of your eyebrows. And where those two lines intersect, that's the middle of your head. So be in the center of your head. And I want you to think of something that makes you really happy. Some good memory that you have that makes you smile. And now I want you to bring that smiling energy down as it flows down over your face. And it comes into your mouth. And it creates an elixir, a golden honey, that washes through your whole being. Okay? Take that golden honey elixir and have it go down your throat, opening up your throat, smiling down. Remember that smiling energy, you want to bring that smiling energy down. Another thing to do is put the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth. When you do that, you're connecting the governor and the functional channel. Okay, so in Eastern philosophy, in acupuncture, we know that the functional channel and the governor channel run up and down through from the top of your head down to your pelvic bone, but you need your tongue there to be able to make the connection. So now they have the smiling energy flow down your throat, opening it up, flowing down into your thymus, which is right there at the top of your sternum. Opening up your thymus like a flower. Using that smiling energy so that the flower begins to open. Now I want you to imagine red. I want the smiling energy to become red. And I want it to fill your heart. So picture your heart. Smile down to your heart. And as you smile down to your heart, I want you to see your heart smiling back at you. Remember to breathe while we're doing this. Now I want you to see that red energy from the heart that you've been smiling at and it's been smiling back at you. I want that energy to turn white as you begin to focus on your lungs. And you smile down at both lobes of your lung, the left and the right. And you can see your lungs smiling back at you. Opening up your lungs, clearing out any sadness or any depression that you might be feeling. And filling your lungs with joy and happiness and love. Now, I want you to go down to your liver, which is on the right-hand side of your body. Picture that green. The smiling energy goes down to your lungs, and you see your liver, and you see your liver smiling back at you. And that smiling energy is washing away any anger or any cruelty that you've been experiencing, and it's changing it to love and joy and happiness. Now I want that energy to turn blue, and I want you to go to your back. It flows to your back, to the right kidney, the left kidney. You're smiling down to your kidneys. And see your kidneys smiling back at you. Washing away any fear and any anxiety you might have been feeling, and turning it into love and joy and happiness. You move around now, that energy turns yellow, and you come around to the front of your body, and you come to your pancreas and your spleen, which is a little bit to the left of the middle, and the pancreas, which comes down below near your solar plexus. And imagine that yellow, and smile down to your pancreas and your spleen. And imagine them smiling back at you. So you see these little happy faces all over your body smiling back at you. Take that smiling energy and allow it to wash away any worry that you may be experiencing and any pity you may be feeling, and change that to love and joy and happiness. And now have that smiling energy come down into your sexual organs and into your abdomen and your large intestines and your small intestines. And smile down to that area and thank that part of your body for working well for you, for producing the hormones you need and all the vital energy that you need. And then what I want you to do is to take both your hands and near your navel, start to make a circle. Women, you're going to go in a counterclockwise direction. Men, you're going to go in a clockwise direction, and I want you to make a circle. We're going to do 36 circles, okay? And so we're going to go from the inside near the navel, because what we're doing is we're collecting that energy. If we leave the energy up in the organs, it may overheat them. So what we're doing is we are actually moving the energy down into the navel area, and we're collecting it there. So women counterclockwise, men clockwise, and 36 times. Okay, so you can count. You're collecting the energy, gathering it into your navel area. And when you've done that 36 times, just rest your hand on your navel area and then imagine that the energy is stored there as a ball. Okay, open your eyes if you have them closed. I hope that was, helpful to you, and that you'll be able to reproduce what we went through again, and hopefully that you're smiling, okay? Because that inner smile makes you smile down to your organs, and think about this too. One of the reasons why we do this inner smile is because most of the time we don't even pay attention to our organs. A lot of people don't even know where their kidneys are, or where their liver is, or where their pancreas or spleen is. And so can you imagine that, like a little child, these organs are being ignored? And you know what happens to little kids when you ignore them? They act up, don't they? So what we want to do here is give our organs, our major organs, attention every day, smile down to them, giving them that good, positive, smiling energy so that they will be healthier. Okay, and therefore we will be healthier. Okay, so this next one is called the 6 healing sounds, and we're going to go through a very similar kind of practice, but what we're going to do this time is we're going to actually use sounds. And the sounds that we're going to use are going to cool the organs, all right? So we're going to go through the same organs again, and I'm going to walk you through a few slides first before we actually do the sounds, okay? So I want to just explain this to you first, and to let you know that I am going to be providing you with a slide, with a document that addresses the 6 healing sounds, okay? So you'll know a little bit more about the philosophy behind it, and what to do, and what sounds to make. So in Taoist philosophy, in Qigong, these sounds are associated with the frequency of each of the organs that it's associated with. So when we make these sounds, we're actually speaking the language of that particular organ. The reason why we make these sounds is because one of the things that happens when we are emotional is that like I said, it heats up the organ that it's associated with. And when we heat up that organ, actually it damages that organ. So around each of the organs is the fascia tissue, right? And that fascia tissue is supposed to help cool down the organs. But when we become overheated, either through emotions or too much exercise, then what we have to do, what happens to that fascia tissue is it sticks. It sticks to the organ, and therefore it cannot cool. And so the purpose of that fascia tissue is to be able to allow that organ to cool and to release the heat out through the skin, and then receive the coolness from the earth and from the skin that would normally calm down and cool off those organs. So that's pretty much what we're doing. You'll notice down here I put the 6 healing sound slides. This is not operational right here, but when you download the actual document and when you download these slides, that link actually leads you to Master Chia's site where he has slides of this practice so that you'll be able to also use the hand motions that he uses when we do the practice. I'm not going to use those hand motions during this demonstration or this exercise that we're going to be doing. I do variations of the 6 healing sounds. I actually do the 6 healing sounds when I'm driving. I'll do it when I'm walking. But I don't use the hand movements and I don't close my eyes. Okay, so you could do the 6 healing sounds whenever you start feeling any of these emotions. Okay, and let me show you basically the cycle in a sense that we're going to be doing, and it's going to be similar to what we just did, but we're going to start with the lungs. Okay, so this exercise of the 6 healing sounds is not only one where we're actually doing some kind of cooling of the organ through the sound, but we're going to use imagery. And we're going to use a cognitive component. The imagery is going to be the part where you're going to image the organ as being a certain color, okay? And as you're imaging the organ as that particular color that it's associated with, then you are also going to be thinking of the negative emotion that is associated with that organ and transforming it to its positive. So to make this more easier to understand, if you look at the lungs here, okay, the lungs here, I'm going to move us to the next slide. The lungs here are associated with the color white. So when we do the lung sound, you're going to image white, okay? So your lungs are going to be white. And then as we do the sound, which I'll show you the sound in a second, but as we're doing the sound, I want you to be thinking about the negative emotion, and I'll coach you through this part. In other words, I'll tell you basically to think about anything that you are particularly sad about right now, and I want you to transform that into the positive emotion, which would be courage. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So let me go back to this other slide here. From the lungs, then we go to the kidneys. Okay, so we go to the back, to our back, and then when you see the slides, you'll see that we actually touch these organs. So if you want to be able to do that, if you want to do that while we're doing that, that's fine too. So when we do the lungs, you would have your hands over the area where your lungs are. When we do the kidneys, you're going to put your hands behind you where your kidneys are, on the left and right sides of your spine, a little bit above your waist, okay? And what you're going to image is you're going to image the color for the kidneys is sky blue. The negative emotion will be fear and anxiety. We're going to transform it into gentleness and stillness. We go next to the liver. Okay, so we go up to the liver. I'm just going to walk you through this part fast. The liver, the heart, and then we get to the spleen, pancreas, and the stomach. So when we do that, the liver you are going to image as being green, forest green, okay? You are going to cognitively think about in what ways have you been feeling any anger, or maybe think ways in which you've been cruel lately. And you're going to transform that into kindness and generosity. In other words, in what ways can I be more kind? How can I be more generous? We go to the heart. The heart is going to be imaged red. And I'm going to ask myself, in what ways have I been impatient or frustrated lately? And I'm going to transform that into love, joy, and happiness. What are things that I can do or ways in which I can be more loving, to have more joy and happiness in my life? And then the last organ that we're going to do is the spleen and pancreas and the stomach, and you're going to image that as being yellow. And the negative emotion that we're associating with that is worry or pity, and we're going to turn that into compassion and fairness. Okay, so you won't have to remember all that, I'll tell you, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on that before we do it. This last one gives you the sound, so I'm going to leave it here as we walk through this practice. And what I want you to know is that although we've talked about these 5 major organs here, remember this is the 6 healing sounds. So the last healing sound is actually associated with the triple warmer, which is one of the meridians, one of the major meridians in our body. And so what the triple warmer is actually from the head to the foot. So what we're going to do when we're doing that sound is we're going to imagine that we're cooling off the 3 zones that constitute the triple warmer. Supposedly, what the philosophy is that the head region is the hottest. Okay, so from the head region, we move down to the area from the neck down to, say, below the stomach area. That's the second area, and then the sexual organs being the third area, which is a cool area. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to equalize the heat because we tend to have more heat up in our head. Okay? So if you're ready, you can sit, you can lie down, you can do whatever you want. I would say you can close your eyes if it makes it more real for you. And you can touch your organs as we go through this. So first of all, you would be touching your lungs. So put your hands lightly on the area where your lungs are. And breathe and imagine that your lungs are white, brilliant white. The sound that we're going to do is a sound where we just put our teeth together. And the sound is like this. You do that slowly. You don't do it too hard. You can actually do it subvocally. You don't even have to do it out loud. But when we do this, I want you to think about your lungs being white, and I want you to think of any sadness or depression that you've been feeling. And I want you to transform that sadness and depression into courage and righteous feeling as we do the sound. Okay, let's do the sound together. We're going to do this 3 times. So again, think of white, sadness transformed into courage. Breathe in between. And one more time. Breathe. Now place your hands on your kidneys if you want to, or you can just imagine them in your mind. And imagine them being blue, sky blue. And I want you to think of any fear or anxiety that you've been experiencing. And I want you to transform that fear or anxiety into gentleness and stillness. In other words, in what ways can you be more gentle with yourself? How can you be more still? And the sound that we're going to make is like the winter wind. And it sounds like this. So let's do that together. Imagine your kidneys being blue, sky blue, and any fear or anxiety that you've had Transform that into gentleness and stillness. And do the winter sound. Breathe in between. Do it again. Take a breath. Take another breath. And now place your hands over your liver. Your liver is under your right breast, below your ribs. I use 2 hands to cover it. You're going to imagine the color green like a forest. And I want you to think of any anger you've had lately or any cruelty. And I want you to transform that into kindness and generosity. How can you be more kind to yourself? How can you be more generous to yourself? How can you be kinder to others? And the sound that we're going to do is like quieting a baby. Just shh. So imagine your liver, green, forest green. Any anger or cruelty, transform that into gentleness, into kindness and generosity. Breathe. One more time. Take a breath. Place your hands on your heart. You're going to imagine your heart red. And I want you to think of any frustration, impatience that you have felt lately. And I want you to transform that into love, joy, happiness, radiance, light, spirit. And the sound that we're going to do is we're going to do this one 3 times too. So I want you to envision your heart red. Any impatience, frustration, transform that into love, joy, happiness, radiance, light, spirit, and do the heart sound. Again. Take a breath. Breathe. Then move your hands down to your stomach area, your spleen and pancreas, which is a little bit to the left below your breast and in the middle. And we're going to do a sound that is guttural. And when I say guttural, on the slide you see it says WHOOO, but you have to do it from the bottom of your throat, not just through your lips. Okay, so let me demonstrate this guttural sound to you. It's I hope you can hear the difference between that and this other sound, which is that one is hot. So you want to go down into the base of your throat when we do this spleen and pancreas sound. Okay? So it's yellow. We're going to imagine any worry or any pity that we've been feeling. And I want you to change that to compassion and fairness. And do the who sound, guttural. Do it again. Imagine it yellow and any worry or pity transformed into compassion and fairness. Take a breath. And now you can drop your hands to your side if you're laying down, or if you're sitting, you can just put them in your lap and have the palms face upwards. And we're going to do the triple warmer sound. And while we're doing the triple warmer sound, I just want you to imagine that red heat is going from the top of your head down through the zones of your body into the earth. And then when you inhale, I want you to take in the coolness of the earth. So imagine that as being blue. Okay, so let's do the triple warmer sound, which is just draw in the cool earth energy. And again, we're going to energetically push that heat down from the top of our head, down through the soles of our feet. Breathing in and drawing the cool earth energy up through your body, cooling it down. And one more time. So I want you to wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, open your eyes, and come out of that trance. Now, if you're like me, I like to go to sleep right after I do the 6 healing sounds, but I'm not going to do that today. Now, these 6 healing sounds, like I said, I do them at night before I go to bed. I do variation of it. I don't do the arm movements like Master Chia had taught us, because he subsequently taught us that you don't have to do the arm sounds, the arm movements. But you can do it if you want to facilitate the efficacy of these sounds. Okay, well, I hope that you can take all of that with you, and that you have found a way to create spaces for your soul to be present. I hope that this webinar has provided you with a kickstart. At least you've gone through 2 Qigong practices that should help you to create those spaces for your soul. And I want to thank you for joining me in this webinar, and I want to invite you to join me on September 12th for the last of my part of this webinar series, where I am going to be talking about feeling our boundaries inside and out.